Welcome to the Denver Gazette Sports Podcast. I am your host, Chris Schmedeke, and today we are brought to you by Applewood Plumbing, Heating, and Electric. They are the proud sponsor of this podcast, and they are also the proud sponsor of the Colorado Avalanche, which we are talking about today with Kyle Fredrickson. Kyle, how are you today?
I'm doing well, nice long road trip for the Avs. I started out on it, but being back home for the past few games, trying to take advantage of it. You're at the arena a lot.
So we will talk about some of these games and the Avs record since the All-Star break and everything, but let's go big picture. And you and I were kidding off air. Who are the Colorado Avalanche?
Yeah, it seems like we have to ask these big picture questions about this team sometimes just because we don't know the answer. They're streaky. They like to win in bunches and lose in bunches. We talked to Luke earlier, our Rockies writer. He compared them to like a college basketball team.
Yeah.
It's a game of runs. So maybe there's a little of that going on right now, but it feels like a team that got very hot before the All-Star break, which they did. I think they were, 12-3-1 in their last 15 before, taking the break. But they haven't gotten back to that same level of hockey. And you could point to a lot of different reasons why that's the case. Nathan MacKinnon maybe hasn't been the out of this world MVP right away since he's come back. And it just shows that when he's not the guy driving the bus, the Avs are going to have some problems, especially against some good teams, because my goodness, this road stretch they've been on has been brutal.
Yeah, so let's looking at this road trip. The overtime loss to start after the break. They lose to the Rangers 2-1. That was a good hockey game. But after that, 5-3, 5-2, 4-0 are the next losses. They did win last night. They beat the Capitals, but like you said, not a great team that they beat. Is it kind of a combination of everything that's hurting them right now?
I think so. They haven't been a good road team all season, and this is a roster that can easily beat the bad teams. The Capitals are below 500. They're out of the playoff picture probably at this point. Last night's game is sort of an expectation. You're going to score 6 goals. You're going to get depth scoring. This team is obviously a playoff team, but once you play the Floridas of the world and some of these other East Coast teams that are truly elite, the Avs have shown that they have some real holes right now. And what we saw last night was refreshing because it was Ross Colton scoring the first goal of the game. Well, that was the first goal scored by a center on the Avalanche, not named Nathan MacKinnon, since they came back from the break. They went 4 games without a center scoring that wasn't MacKinnon. So they got to get other guys involved, and that's the biggest part of it all. Some of those losses we saw just some really dumb puck management, guys losing the possession in their own zone. Sam Girard, losing a puck battle behind the net and it leads to an easy goal. Just stuff like that. But some of that's rust, right? You're coming off the break. You got to get back into a flow. We've seen how good this Avalanche team can be when they find that rhythm. It just seems like they're offbeat right now.
We talk about secondary scoring with this team, and Arturi Lehkonen had a good game last night, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that had 4 points, I think, but it's just been the problem since they won the Cup 2 years ago now.
Yeah, and it's almost, maybe Avalanche fans were spoiled that year because that was just incredible depth, and that's the reason why I think a big reason why the Avs won that year. But yeah, it just seems like, especially at that second line center and backup goalie role, they haven't been able to figure it out for a while. And, shout out to Pavel Francouz. I think he has an injury that's just going to maybe prevent him from playing hockey again, which is a big bummer, but it just shows how much they miss a guy like Frankie when we're seeing Georgiev getting trotted out there every single night. And Bednar is, complimentary and says that's because Georgiev is good, but it's also because they don't have another guy they trust to put into that 60-40 split. That seems to be kind of the norm for most contenders these days. Granted, some of the elite guys end up playing, 60, 70 games in the regular season. It's just a short list. Is Georgiev good enough to be on that list? I'm not exactly sold on that yet. So I do think, to your point, finding depth behind Georgiev, finding depth on that second line center could be big for this team. It just, the options are running out at this point with some high profile guys, especially centers taken. And also knowing that the asking price could be a first round pick if the Avs actually want to get some real value in return.
Well, let's talk about Georgiev a little bit because, some of those scores are not good, 5-4, he was an all-star. You and I kind of were surprised by that with him making the all-star team.
To a certain degree, sure.
Yeah, but is he worn out? Is he not as elite as some of us have been led to believe? Is this just a bad stretch? Is it all of that combined? Like, what do you think?
I don't think any of these past few games you look at and say, "Oh man, like Georgie blew that one
Right.
for the Avs." There's goals that he wants back. I think the biggest thing that I've maybe seen with him is that there's times when he gets a little sloppy with his rebounds.
Mhm.
A lot of the goals that are scored against him look pretty easy because it's a guy with an open net who snags the puck that bounces off of Georgiev and he puts it right in there. Some of that it's hard to prevent as a goalie, but it's also a style issue, right? Being able to pounce on that thing as soon as it bounces off of you. And I think we've seen at times Georgiev struggle. Now, that being said, it seems like some of the structural issues and some of just the bad puck management stuff I've talked about, Georgiev has bailed them out at times, right? I mean, goalie stats are weird. It's if you compartmentalize different pieces of periods, they can be outstanding, right? Georgiev the other night had a barrage of shots where I think there were 6 or 7 Panther shots on goal in a row, and he held solid, right? He was great, and everyone on Twitter celebrates it. But then 5 minutes later, if he lets a goal in, that kind of goes out the window. So I don't think there's any concerns about him being the guy. To your point, maybe he's a little mentally worn out because of all the work, but he won't cop to that. And I think the Avs do have a good enough pulse to say, hey, we've got to give this guy a break if he absolutely needs it. Because they have Justice Annunen, who's a third-round pick and a guy who's still developing. It just seems like maybe they're not sold on him being the backup, given how little of an opportunity he's gotten when he has been called up to the roster.
It's looking at their schedule on ESPN.com, and it's a lot of Gorgiev in that goalie column. It's just Gorgiev, Gorgiev, Gorgiev. Like it's a story when he doesn't play, and we were talking about them beating bad teams, but kind of struggling against good teams. That has to be a worry for Coach Bednar as we come down the stretch here.
For sure, and I think it puts the Avs in a position where they're, fighting for the Central all the way to the end
Yep.
with that formula, right? Because there's enough bad teams to kind of feast on. And if you're sort of 50-50 or below that against the better teams, that puts you in a pretty good position. But yeah, it's the same issue that they ran into last year, right? Because the Kraken, I mean, they were so deep and they didn't have the star powers that the Avs had, but they could score in waves and they could roll 4 lines and they had that depth. The Avs are going to play probably a team better than the Kraken in the first round this year, if I had to guess, just based on the strength of the West. And so they've got to prove that they can stand tall against those better opponents because, it's Nathan MacKinnon can only do so much, right? I really do think he is the Hart winner still at this point, even with his, kind of lackluster start out of the break here. He did have an assist last night, maybe 2 assists. So, we'll see what happens there, but he still has to be the best player on the ice for the Avalanche to win most games.
We talk about doomsday here, but they're 2 points behind Dallas for the lead in the Central.
Right, exactly. They're right in the mix, but I do think that the win last night was significant. I sort of was going into that game thinking, boy, if they lose 5 in a row and the 5th is to a bad team, this could get ugly. And there was a time when the Capitals tied it with 2 quick goals within a minute or so. And I thought, all right, maybe this team really is, sort of struggling, but give them credit for figuring that out. And I think as they play more games, Bednar will stop shuffling lines so much. It seems like no one's had a permanent place since the break ended. But we'll see what happens. They're going to have to win some games first.
Let's real quick. We were talking off air too about Val Nichushkin being out now. It's almost been 30 days. We wrote a Friday face-off last week about what could be an obstacle for the Avs, and I picked Val Nichushkin's absence. We all understand Val Nichushkin's absence. We understand what he needed to get help. We all support that. But on a hockey term, they miss him so much.
Oh man, it's big time. And it just seemed like even that game last night, the Avs don't have that net front presence, right? Yeah. Just that bully in front who's going to either make sure the puck isn't going in or is going to just continue battling until they bash it in. And, that's where they've missed Val and Landeskog to that point for so long now because they don't really have many bullies on this team, guys willing to do that. Ryan Johansson should be that guy. He's a big dude. I've seen him in the locker room. He's He's a lot bigger than me. I'd trust him in a street fight, but he hasn't shown that sort of physicality, right? And I think that's where they need Val. It's the scoring, it's the power, and we'll see. It's the only point of context that I would bring up in the conversation that we haven't already touched is it seems like this is a repeated problem for Val, right? The phrasing in the statement was for once and for all to finish this. So to me, that it does imply that there could be extra time needed. Like this isn't a guy who's gone through this only one time before. I don't know that the league has been making it public every time a guy goes into the program, like every year in the past. But my guess is that Val has been through this previously. So, we hope that he's doing well and that he's going to be back in a timely manner. But, just listen to Bednar on his weekly radio show today. There's no real update, and he doesn't expect to hear from Val until he comes back. So, I think to some degree they're as much in the dark as we are. When the team returns from their road trip, I am curious to ask Bednar if they've been in communication with Val, if someone with the team has been in touch, medical staff, or otherwise, because you really would hope that at least they're getting some progress updates, so that when he is about ready to return, they can kind of, brace for that. And hopefully it's before the playoffs, just for the Avalanche's sake.
So trade deadline's what, about a month away or so, or maybe a little less?
March 8th. So a little less than a month. Yeah.
You mentioned that it could cost them a lot. They had some big names attached to them that have moved to other teams. So, do they do anything drastic, or is it like Val Nichushkin's going to be our trade deadline accusation? Something like that. There's still always the Gabe Landeskog piece floating out there. You and I talked about that a couple podcasts ago. That's not happening, I don't think. I think we kind of both agree. I don't think we'll see him at all.
Late in the playoffs would be optimistic in my mind.
Right. So, they're usually pretty aggressive. They weren't crazy last year, but the cup year they were. Do they do anything, or is this kind of a let's get healthy and see where we're at?
A little bit of let's get healthy. I do think that there was initial optimism that putting Ryan Johansson on the second line with more talented wingers would allow him to have a little bit of a breakout. But here he is on the fourth line last night against the Capitals, and with ice time that just keeps winding down and down. So I do think that they have to get serious about a second line center. And there are a couple options out there. I had an NHL insider on Monday that broke down 5 guys that Avs should look at. The one center on the list who I think could actually be a legit 2C is Adam Henrique. He's with the Ducks. After Elias Lindholm and Sean Monahan, he's really been kind of the most highly touted guy. He has 7 seasons, or he's on pace for 7 seasons with 20 plus goals. So that's sort of what you look for in terms of production out of that line. He's not like an elite speed guy, sort of like Johansson, but his hockey IQ, the net front presence, he's been a better player this year. That's an Avs guy that the Avs could go get. The problem is are you willing to give up that first round pick? Because that's what they got for Monahan when he got traded to the Jets, and same with Lindholm going to the Canucks. So it really is a question of, are the Avs one piece away? Is it worth leveraging a part of their future to do that? Or are you just, trying to fill a sinking ship with one little, thumbtack, and while water's rushing in everywhere around you, like that ain't going to work. That's not going to give you a title. So we'll see. Goalie is the other option. Marc-Andre Fleury is the kind of the sexy name that's out there for contenders to go and grab, just being that he's an older guy who wants to be on a cup contending team, and the Wild have sort of fallen out of it. A couple other goalies on that list who maybe, aren't as high profile, but when you look at a backup goaltender, you really just want a guy who's a veteran and that you respect and is consistent. There's a few guys out there. Jake Allen with the Canadiens, maybe top of that list. But we'll see. The one thing I always go back to with the Avs, and anytime we've seen them make a trade, it's always like, oh wow, how did McFarland pull that off? Like, right. Oh wow, the Avs didn't give up anything for Ryan Johansson. If you remember, it was sending Alex Galchenyuk to the Predators, and they waived him. It was basically just a salary dump by Nashville. So if they find a deal, it might not be one where they find the second line center. Maybe it's a depth center, but they need to get more guys who are capable of scoring and producing in that role if they're going to want to have enough depth for the playoffs. Because I don't think that this roster, as it's constructed, is a cup winning team. Maybe they prove me wrong, but it just doesn't feel like it.
It's crazy to think that they almost feel less deep than last year. And that's all we talked about last year going into that Seattle series was how they weren't deep.
Yeah, and some of that is just McKinnon dominating,
Yeah.
right? I mean, it's
Yeah.
like when one guy's carrying the load so much, it sort of like exacerbates like, hey, what is everybody else doing on this team? So we'll see. Like we said when we started the podcast, it's a streaky group. We could be back here next week talking about, wow, the Avs are contenders. Could they lock up the Central next month? So who knows? But I do trust that there's not a lot of panic in that room. But there are some problems. I mean, I think, we'd be fanboys to sit here and say that, hey, the Avs, I don't think right now are the team that's going to win it all.
What do you expect Thursday night in Tampa Bay? You don't want to say must win, but they have to show out good in that game.
They do. I think McKinnon's going to be real motivated going against Kucherov, right?
Yeah.
I mean, those guys are neck and neck for the points and goals. And you want to show up in big games, right? If McKinnon wants the MVP, he better go into Tampa and put on a show. And we've seen him do that at times against great opponents and carry these guys. But given the team's lack of success against good opponents, it's going to be a night where Nate's going to have to be the guy.
All right, Kyle, thanks for coming on. What got anything to plug?
Just plugging away on a few different stories. For all of you sickos out there who are still following the Altitude TV Comcast
saga.
Yes, I'm gonna be writing about that soon. Also, just trying to put into context, like, what could Kroenke be doing right now? Because to be honest, it's sort of crickets in terms of how they're going to widen distribution of games for this team, right? The Nuggets and Avalanche. We heard Josh Kroenke, I think it was, last summer, talking about we're doing everything we can. We feel your frustration. Sort of empty words when not a lot of progress is made. So I've reached out to Kroenke several times. As soon as I hear from them, I'll be putting up a story because that's noteworthy. But they've sort of been notorious to this point for being tight-lipped. But I mean, fans deserve answers, right? I mean, yep. I don't know if you still got Comcast, but it's a wild thing when the majority of cable subscribers can't watch these teams.
I only have DirecTV to watch Nuggets and Avs games. Not another channel is watched on my DirecTV. I mean, maybe the golf channel here and there, but you can stream golf on Peacock and you can stream golf on PGA Tour Live, and it's just, I wish Altitude had, just today news of the Rockies streaming. You can pay $20 or whatever it is or whatever I don't know the pricing, but that just came out today about the Rockies streaming more. I wish Altitude would get on that streaming boat if they could. But hey, that's where it is, I guess, right
Gotcha.
now. I tried the, oh my goodness, what was that one product?
Evoca.
I had that for a while because it was really cheap.
Right.
And it was not a good experience, and they went out of business. So there you go. All right. Make sure to check out all Kyle's stuff on denvergazette.com. Make sure to subscribe to this podcast on Spotify or on Apple. And Kyle, we will probably catch up next week after the Avs actually have some home games.
Yeah, absolutely. It'd be nice to be back in the arena.
Yep. We'll talk to you then.
Yep.